Glad to be with everybody today. Couple of words. We do a ton of work around feelings. That's necessary. Obviously, we beat the tar out of feelings for good reason and connecting with story. So I'm really confident that we all recognize that depression on the emotional end of things, that depression is about impaired anger, right? Just a reminder, it's depressing caring about life. So let's start with that base. Like that's kind of the teaching spiritual root system, coach training, cohort, whiteboard, PowerPoint slide 101. Like if we don't deal with anger, if a human doesn't deal with anger, then that person will move into a condition called depression where they're depressing their caring for life, depressing their willingness to deal with the pain of risk or the pain of caring or the pain of investment or the pain of reaching for change. And so, while I don't want to soft pedal that, I want to go to a really what feels like, for lack of a better term, what feels like a different territory, but it really isn't. So, we're going to talk a lot about the mind today. That's not in place of the feelings, but it goes along with feelings. And Todd and I talk, gosh, at least once a day, usually more than that, around how we can most help you. And the way we can most help you is I get feedback from cohorts and go, okay, how, from what I'm hearing in cohorts for feedback, how can we help you with that? So one of the consistent things in cohort is, gosh, I get stuck. I get stuck with clients and I don't know where to go. Maybe particularly in anxiety and depression. We've connected feelings with story. We've gone through the 10 most painful. We've done these things. I don't really know where else to go. So we want to design these webinars that are really good use of your time that equips you in ways that we're hearing feedback wise that you need equipping in. So get ready today. You can access the slides later. I put a lot of science on the front end and made it really applicable on the back end. So don't worry about remembering all the terms and the neuroscience around all of it. This is just to give you as a coach a reference point and a well of data over here to draw from as you're working with clients. So today's going to feel kind of different in terms of Tin Man, the feelings thing. So one last time, we're not setting feelings aside, but there's a whole other territory of dealing with depressed people that we tend to leave behind because we're concentrating so hard on feelings and story, which is totally important to do. So today, let's just let this be a puzzle piece in the overall on the overall kind of way we deal with clients, particularly in territory of depression. So um, let's just start. I'm going to screen share ye old PowerPoint. Okay. So healing the mind, that word is on purpose. Now we've heard us talk about Jeremiah 17:10, where the word mind is translated kilya, which means kidneys, which means the deepest part of humankind. Well, the word mind also has to do with our thinking. And it's going to be a very rare client that doesn't have anxiety along with depression. How the brain works, really how the human body works, is we need an accelerator, that's anxiety, and we need a brake, that's depression. So just because we're applying the brake more often doesn't mean the accelerator isn't in play. And so if you've ever been in a car goofing around or done it not on purpose and you've got your foot on the brake and the accelerator, just think about how the car strains to move. And if you keep equal pressure on both, it'll just spin. Well, that's what happens when a person is in depression. Think about a car that's stuck in a rut and it doesn't realize that it's trying to get out of the rut, pressing on the gas. That's anxiety, but the brake is continuing to be applied. That's depression to keep the car stuck. So leave that metaphor in your heads for now. That's how anxiety and depression work together. So the using the metaphor of the car, what we notice in the car is it's not moving. So people will often talk about being stuck in depression. And so if you can use that metaphor, maybe you have a better one to use with clients, let them know, like, yes, that's what depression does. You're mashing on the brake really hard to protect yourself from something. We're gonna look at that in just a second. Then the amygdala. But meanwhile, you're pressing on the gas to get out of it and nothing's happening. You're standing still. So we're going to take a look at how the brain, anxiety, and toxic shame work alongside impaired anger to keep a person stuck in depression. So this profile is actually from Menninger and Menninger. They wrote a book. It's a married couple way back in the day. They wrote a book called Medical Marriage, and I changed it obviously to a typical 10-man client. A lot of our clients are in ministry in some regard, the spouse of a pastor or pastor themselves, a lay leader, a retreat leader, for example. Just take a look at those. I'm not going to read them off to you. Like a look at those characteristics of many, if not most of the clients we see. Look at those. Just think about your client load, and I won't read any of these, but just take a look at those list of characteristics. Now, these are physician characteristics. And by the way, Chip and I told guys for years and years in treatment, and which is true data, if you take a typical personality profile of a physician and you lay a profile of a pastor, ministry leader on top of that, they're almost identical. But they're both have high expectations of themselves. They're expected to be accessible 24/7. They're expected to have all the answers. They're expected to be superhuman, and the spouses included. Like y'all who work with spouses of pastors, you know that routine. And you don't have to be a pastor to have these characteristics, obviously. So a lot of people that come into our caseloads carry most, if not all, of these characteristics. So just notice those. Think about your caseload. I'm going to give you just a few seconds to look at that list of a profile of characteristics of a person that is really at high risk for falling into depression. Look at the pressure all of these characteristics exert on the human limbic system. That next to last one, by the way, were poor internal response to limit recognition. That's just a way of saying toxic shame. Like I have limits. And when I recognize I have limits, my internal response is poor, meaning I shame myself, I hate myself, despise my humanness as we define toxic shame. And of course, the last one is a more overt statement about the place of shame, toxic shame. We hide how much shame we have about our feelings of how ineffective or inadequate we are. Okay. So this is a long statement. Like I said, you'll have access to these slides. Don't really expect you to get all that. Basically, Alex Korb has done phenomenal work in how depression occurs in a downward spiral and how we can help people come out of that spiral with an upward spiral. Super practical things like exercise and nutrition. We won't touch on a lot of that today, stuff we normally already know intuitively. But Korb has written more than this. This is a great book in terms of just really practical application. But just look at that last, Todd dolled up these slides. Look at the last statement there that Todd bolded. The disease of depression is a pattern of activity that arises from the interactions of all these circuits. So although we talk, when we're teaching neuroscience or thinking about neuroscience, we tend to think in terms of 3 parts of the brain. And we put it on the whiteboard or a slide, we look at them as separate, the brainstem, the limbic brain, and the thinking brain. Well, they're actually just a network. And so there's never a part of the brain that is inactive or necessarily offline. It's a network all the time. And by the way, the word disease of depression is on purpose. American Medical Association defines disease as being phenomenological. It means it's observed. So we can observe the outward characteristics of depression. It's progressive. Depression doesn't get better on its own. You can lay in a dark room forever and you're not going to magically get better. And it can be fatal if not treated. As we know, people will commit suicide over depressive symptomology, and so being stuck. So that it is a pattern of activity from interactions and all the brain circuits happening in concert with each other. It's just a reminder that we describe it in compartmentalized manners, but the brain operates as one system, connected neuronically through neurons. Okay, let's go through a glossary. Again, don't worry about remembering this as much as having something to refer to. So you're going to see a breakdown of depression according to the National Institutes of Health. So just put this in your coach's database. The phrase mood congruent attention bias, here's what that means. When a person has a schema or a filter that is biased toward depression, we're going to talk about how that happens by impaired anger, for instance. When that's occurred, it's a biased deployment of attention, which means my attention, when I'm depressed, my attention goes toward filtering the world and interpreting the world through my depression. So mood congruent attention bias simply means the filter forms in front of me in which I view the world through a depression lens. And so if someone says to my left brain, well, look at what a great job you have, the lens I'm looking at that information through is covered with depression, and I can't see that. And so that's a phrase you're going to see in just a second. So it's a deployment, a use of attention that is gravitating toward information that is congruent with my depression. That's what that means. The phrase attenuation just means a weakening or reduction. When I am attenuating something, it means I'm letting go of my attention to it. I'm taking back my attention. Subcortical just means below the cortex, or what we call limbic brain. You're going to see the phrase depressogenic schemas. Depressogenic simply means factors that contribute to depression, which can be nutrition, it can be rest or lack thereof. It's thought patterns that become mood congruent. We get biased toward these mood congruent thought patterns. And so those are called depressogenic, contributing factors to depression. That's the filter. Think of schemes as filters. So that's just a glossary of terms to go with this. This is from the National Institutes of Health and the Academy of Neuroscience. Here's what they say. Depression, remember, is a mood congruent attentional bias, that filter, at the later stages of processing information. And so the brain takes in information and integrates information through 4 stages. You see them there listed in bullet points. The first one is attending. We pay attention to something. So as we're paying attention to something, think about a conversation, for instance, or a coaching session. We're paying attention. That information comes in through the nervous system, and then the brain encodes it. It processes it. And then it stores it in a place in the brain that becomes memory, implicit memory and explicit memory. Remember, the amygdala stores it implicitly, the hippocampus stores it explicitly. The thinking brain stores it explicitly, the limbic brain stores it implicitly. And then retrieval, how we access the information when we need it. I'm gonna take a breath here. So depression is a mood congruent attentional bias, what we talked about earlier, the filter we look through, and we're seeking to look at information through the filter of depression. So when we're gathering information, as we're processing that information, where the brain stores the information and how we even retrieve the information is all filtered through depression. That's what that means. And so when a person gets in a depressed state, when they're pressing on the gas and the brake at the same time and they're stuck, what they're doing is the way they attend, encode, store, and retrieve information from the world is clouded by that schema of depression. That's the reason people stay stuck. That's the reason new information, they can attend to new information. They can take in the new information. They can store the information. But when they retrieve the information, they retrieve it from that place that's covered with depression. That's the reason you can't talk someone out of being depressed. Because once they retrieve the data you're giving them, it's got a gray depression over it. So the next step in understanding that, prefrontal areas in the green there, prefrontal areas, just think of that as the thinking brain. So the thinking brain has decreased activity, which comes from the brain's inability to decrease attention to the limbic system. So the brain says, no, I'm not going to take attention away from the limbic system in order to think clearly. I'm not doing that because I'm going to do protection. So I'm going to prolong the activation of the amygdala and remain in hypervigilance. So notice how anxiety is creeping into the equation of depression. So depression creates a schema, right? Depressogenic schema. It produces a schema that creates deactivate or limited activation in the thinking brain, because the brain is saying, no, 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 the world is terrible, and I've got to keep my amygdala red hot to protect me from this terrible world. So notice how anxiety is now starting to join the party. And so remember this statement in the green that says, okay, when I'm working with someone who is depressed, I've got to also be paying attention to the fact that they're living in hypervigilance. What does that do, by the way? Hypervigilance is a brain drain. It results in fatigue. And what do people do? They sit on the couch, they eat a bunch of carbs, they sleep, they do things that are attempting to settle down the activation of that amygdala, and it's draining and fatiguing. So pay attention to how we're going to talk about the insulin in just a minute, how the insula that does physiological experience, it's in the party now with fatigue. The amygdala is at the party, which means anxiety, because my prefrontal cortex, my thinking brain, has decreased activity because I'm paying a lot of attention to the amygdala, to the limbic brain, because the world is a terrible place. And so anxiety is in play. There's the accelerator, which means I press the brake even harder and I stay stuck. And so notice the kind of peach colored, orange colored banner at the bottom. Reduced prefrontal control, which means the thinking brain has less control with these schemas, which leads to an impaired ability to inhibit rumination. So rumination is like meditation. It's chewing the cud. We're going to see that later. When I'm ruminating on something, biblically, we call that meditation. David says in Psalm 119, I meditate on your word. I meditate on your word. Depression says, don't meditate on the word. Ruminate on this schema you created. Ruminate on the depression filter that I'll look through. I'll take a kind of a deep breath here. So notice how all these different neuronal networks are coming together. The limbic brain says, I'm going to prolong the activation of the amygdala and stay in anxiety because the world is dangerous. Depression says, yep, that's the filter I look through. So I'm not going to do top-down thinking. I'm going to do bottom-up reactivity. And so I've got my foot on the brake with depression, saying the world is gray. Everything I do, what I attend to, what I encode, what my brain stores, even what I retrieve is covered with depression. My foot's on the brake, but which creates prolonged activation of the limbic system, which matches the accelerator. And so I've got to do something to keep that car stuck because the world is dangerous and I'm in hypervigilance and I'm utterly exhausted. And so all I can do is, rather than meditate on hope, meditate on care, meditate on relationship, I ruminate to make sure I stay stuck because of how dangerous the world is. And so we have the body in fatigue, anxiety in the limbic system, and depression in the thinking brain because it's limited in activation. Which brings us to something super familiar. This is a great thing to use. You, of course, use layman's terms, as do I in coaching sessions. When we're letting people know that, hey, I know you're depressed. You have depression. It's for real. And let me tell you how you're also in a ton of anxiety just from how your brain works. And what happens is you get into this cycle. And I know we all know this. I'm going to blow through this. It starts with that thinking, remember, schema. I am defective because I can't flourish in this depressed world. I'm looking through a filter and it's got to be my fault. So I've got to find the energy somehow to create this false role to show to the world because I'm on my own. It's all up to me. No one will meet my needs. So I've got to be my own answer, which takes a ton of energy to do that. And I inevitably am going to run into negative consequences. And here's where the self-fulfilling prophecy comes to bear on how the brain works. Remember, mood congruent attention. See, told you the world was terrible. I told you I was defective. I told you it's not going to work out for me. I told you I'm inadequate. I told you all this stuff. And so that's how that mood congruent bias continues to be in place. Because when I inevitably run into negative consequences, isolation, being all by myself, in bed, on the couch, eating chips, binging on Netflix. When all that's going on, I have negative consequences. And I say, see, I tried to tell you. And there goes, keeps me in hypervigilance, because now on top of the world being dangerous, now I'm no good. And so I'm defective, and then the cycle continues. So this is a super handy tool as you're working with depressed people. It's a super handy tool to say, let me show you how anxiety, fatigue, and this depressive state you're in, this impaired anger, how it operates in a cycle. And so this is a great thing. This is 4, 5, 6, this is 7 sessions at least, or 14 if you do 2 on each, just processing these 7 pieces of this cycle and helping them integrate, oh, wait a minute, my body, brainstem, my hypervigilance and anxiety about how dangerous the world is, limbic brain, and what I'm continuing to ruminate on because I'm so activated in the limbic brain, my prefrontal cortex is not active in being able to see a bright future, how all those things are in play, that neuronal network of that brain working together to keep me stuck in depression because the world's so dangerous. Okay, so anxiety has joined the party. And let's talk about a little bit how we can intervene on the anxiety piece of that. I really encourage you, when you're doing these things with people, like, let them know what you're doing. That's one of the great things about coaching is, like, you know, we're going to do some interventions because your amygdala is being activated for way, way longer to keep you safe from a dangerous world due to that depression filter you're looking through. And so we're going to work on some breathing. And so breathing, the abbreviation SNS is sympathetic nervous system. When we are at rest or we're in safety and security, we're in a parasympathetic nervous system state. When we get excited, aroused, scared, hypervigilant, it's a sympathetic nervous system state. And so when we breathe, when we practice on focused breathing with clients, can even do it together with them, it reduces that sympathetic nervous system state, helps them breathe in that oxygen to say, okay, my limbic brain thought I was dying, but if it's taking in oxygen, I'm okay. So it improves the ability, it says it improves emotional regulation. It really improves the ability to regulate emotion. Notice what oxygen does. It thickens and strengthens the prefrontal cortex or thinking brain. Very important concept there. Help them know that, look, you can literally improve your ability to think if you will feed your brain oxygen. And so to do that with them, so let's just do this together. I'm going to put a minute on the clock and let's just breathe and concentrate on breathing. So what that's going to do is that's going to give attention to that part of your brain that's less activated, where you do clear thinking, that contributes to you staying stuck in depression. That increases heart rate variability. All that is the ability to go from a very high heart rate and then get back to a baseline. Like when you're doing HIIT exercise, for instance, you want a high heart rate variability. You want to be able to go high volume or high variability, a high level of cardiac activity, and then get back to a baseline. So that variability being big is what we're after, because notice the letter A there. A high heart rate variability is more desirable than low. It demonstrates your body can recover more easily from stress. So just to let them know, like, hey, this has a physiological payoff for you as well. When you can move yourself from this high level of stress to a lower level, from a sympathetic nervous system state to a parasympathetic state, that's going to improve your ability to recover from stress. And then number 6 there, remember the insula, where it talks about insular reactivity. The insula is the part of the brain that is activated with physiological experience. We talked about it in another webinar, maybe it was in a cohort or two, that people who are cutters are attempting to wake up their insula. They're trying to react to the insula, because the insula says, I'm having a physiological experience. My body is experiencing something. And so when we're breathing and we're giving attention to the physical body, the insula goes, okay, someone's paying attention to my physical body. So you don't have to cut, for instance. You don't have to do self-harm activity. So number 6 can be really good if someone, we've had a client or two that harms themselves. Some people will hit themselves in the face. We've had clients who have had some cutting behaviors, those kinds of things, or will push themselves to horrible extents in exercise, those kinds of things. So that's really helpful. Tell people, know, if you will just concentrate on breathing, just give 60 seconds to breathing, it really does touch all 6 of these parts of the human body and gets us back into a parasympathetic state. So breathing is one intervention. Another one, just another reminder, remember we're addressing amygdala activation. We want to settle that amygdala down. Progressive muscle relaxation. I do that with almost all EMDR intensives. And here's what progressive muscle relaxation is. If you help the client start with the top of their body, with their jaws and neck, have them create tension in their bodies to about 70%. So about a 6 or a 7 on a 10-point scale. Just create tension in your jaw, tension in your neck, and then slowly release it. And then your shoulders, slowly release it. Go all the way down. I usually go jaw, neck, shoulders, upper arms, lower arms and hands, chest, abdomen, hips, upper legs, lower legs, ankles, and feet. But you can divide that up however you want. Just go slowly. Say, don't hurt yourself, but just a 6 or a 7. We're just going to progressively go down your body, and you create tension to about a 7. Hold it for about 3 seconds, and then slowly let the tension go, and then go to the next part of the body all the way down. This is what it does. It increases that HRV we just talked about. It lowers cortisol levels. Number 3, look at that. It reduces depression. Huge effect on GAD is generalized anxiety disorder and panic, and literally reduces headaches. By the way, this is from the National Institutes of Health. They're a psychiatry, I believe their psychiatry channel. So progressive muscle relaxation, we're going to touch on the importance of experiential work with clients on this. These two, breathing, this one, breathing for anxiety, and this one, PMR, super helpful. They don't take long. They're simple. Therapists do it, but it's not necessarily the lone market for therapists. Like, this is great for coaching. Like, we're just coaching them through paying attention to their bodies, bringing that parasympathetic nervous system back online. Okay, so here's just a little summary, super high level. Notice in depression, there's increased activation in the amygdala. So remember, when they've got their foot on the brake, depression, they also are experiencing anxiety. So keep that in mind. The amygdala is activated. Therefore, there is decreased activation in the thinking brain, prefrontal cortex is PFC. Now, there's a part of the prefrontal cortex called the ventromedial section of that. Don't worry about what that means. But that part of the thinking brain increases. And that part of the brain is where rumination occurs. So when a person is depressed, that ventromedial portion of their prefrontal cortex is increased in its activation. So the thinking brain itself decreases. So we're bottom-up reactivity, not top-down response, right? Top the brain down. We're subcortical at this point. The prefrontal cortex decreases in activation. We don't think clearly. We can't think anything other than depressive thoughts. How come? Because the ventromedial section of that PFC increases in activation, and all we can do is ruminate on my depression. Notice the insula decreases in activation. People become numb to their bodies, right? The insula is the part of the brain that does physiological experience. When people are depressed, their bodies become numb. They buy bigger clothes and wear baggier clothes. If they gain weight from eating, their clothes hang on them. If they're not eating, if they're restricted in their eating or overly exercising, people can overly exercise. If they're depressed, they normally aren't exercising. But if they are to get away from their depression, they won't recognize the harm they're doing to their bodies. And so the insulin becomes decreased in its activation and it doesn't pay attention what's happening to the body. Mind wandering, the default mode network, we won't go into what all that is. It's also a network. That default mode network is where the mind wanders. It becomes very activated. A person who's in depression their minds will often wander. And where are they going to wander? They're going to wander to two things: how terrible the world is and their lives, and the danger, quote unquote, of thinking otherwise. So their mind will wander to maybe a brighter future, but think back to the toxic shame cycle, that will end up circling the drain of, but it won't work out for me. So the mind wanders, it doesn't stay. If someone's highly depressed and they're in a meeting at work, they will not stay engaged in the meeting. That amygdala is activated and red hot. They're looking through that mind congruent schema that they created through depression. They will not stay in that meeting. So remember that in your sessions with them as well. If they're stuck in depression, they may have a wandering mind. I'm going to show you a little experiential to help people with that. And then the ACC, that's anterior cingulate cortex. That's the part of the brain that's very active in regulating emotion. It becomes decreased. So notice that asterisk, the cingulate, the middle C there of the ACC, it is responsible to say, hey, we need to stop this. So the cingulate says, hey, we need to stop this rumination. We need to stop sitting on the couch and eating chips. We need to stop binging on Netflix. We need to get up and move. We need to stop. But it is reduced. It doesn't get much of a voice because the ACC is decreased in activation due to that default mode network being on board. So the bottom, meditation helps reconnect these parts of the brain that become not literally disconnected, but become experientially disconnected. Like my thinking brain and feeling brain are not connected with each other. They're connected. The depressed person can't see it, can experience it. So some really practical things for you. We're going to wrap up here in about 5-10 minutes to Q&A or questions, whatever you may have about that. So here's some interventions. Remember, experiential is the key. If we just give homework assignments to a depressed person, they're going to be way too busy sitting on the couch or being in bed to do the homework. And so when you're with a depressed person, be sure you're doing experiential things with them. One example I put on here, have them recite their ruminations. Say, hey, just in real time, let's just spend this 50 minutes. And I just want you to recite, what are you ruminating on? What memories are you having, or what thoughts are you having about the future? What are you thoughts you having about yourself? And then just have them add, I'm going to do it on the desktop. Just have them, hey, while we're doing this, while you're reciting these ruminations, I just want you to tap the top of your knees like this. Just tap your knees. Just have your client do that. I know it seems silly to you. All we're doing, we're just addressing as many parts of your brain as we can. We want you to say out loud what the ruminations are. I want your body to feel your hands lightly tapping on your legs. We can wake up more parts of your brain to work together to move you to a different place. So remember the word experiential. When a person is kind of frozen in depression, we know they also have anxiety. We want to make sure we address their anxiety by doing things with them, and we address the depression by helping them get active in something. Even if it's not moving literally, get them active in doing something in the session. And so just say, hey, let's just go through the things you're ruminating on, and let's just say them out loud and just do this while we're doing it. Then 1 minute meanderings. The mind wandering aspect of the brain operates in that default mode network. And so just say, hey, I'm going to put a minute on the clock. And I just want you to just say out loud wherever your brain goes, your grocery list, your kids, your job, the fact you don't have a job, whatever it is, we're going to give you 1 minute and we're just going to practice you saying your meanderings out loud. All that's going to do is that's just going to give them an opportunity to make a little bit of incremental movement right? Depression lives in that default mode network, the brain working with the gas pedal and the brake at the same time. That's the default mode network. That's where it lives. And so let's go into where depression lives and just have you do how your mind is wandering and what it's wandering to. I'm going to be quiet. Let's be quiet. In about 10 seconds, let's just start saying out loud where your brain's going. It's incremental and it's small change, but it's change. The meaningful meditation, the word meditation there is it's a Hebrew picture of a cow chewing its cud. I remember the first time my grandfather told me what that meant about gross. A cow will eat grass and then it puts it into one stomach and then regurgitates it and chews it again and then swallows it again. That's chewing the cud. So meditation is I take something in and then I bring it to mind again and keep chewing on it and keep chewing on it and keep chewing on it. You want to make sure when you're dealing with a depressed person, when you're doing that meaningful meditation, and all that means is we're just going to take 1 minute or 90 seconds or 45 seconds, and I'm just going to read something to you. It may be something from Nouwen. It may be something from scripture. It may be something from another devotional piece. It may be something you've written in your journal that's safe to share. Whatever it is, I'm just going to read this to you. We're going to meditate over this sentence or over these couple of sentences. And then we're just going to talk it through slowly. Make sure you're using plural language that wakes up the prefrontal cortex, the thinking brain, to say, okay, I'm not alone. My coach is doing this with me. Remember, depression is an isolating condition. Remember that fifth column to the far left? Toxic shame will put us into utter isolation where I'm self-will run riot with depression. And so plural language is super important for people who are depressed. Duke Rivard, our friend at the Eden Project, he's produced a really great piece called Learning to Pray the Psalms. I posted this here. I'm going to take just a minute to show off. I've never done this before. You're the first. So if it doesn't work, I would love for you to blame Todd or Jordan actually for it. But I scheduled an email to be sent out at 11 to hit everybody's inbox. And so hopefully you'll get this list. Did you see it? Oh, okay. Oh, it's not 11. You're impressed? So these are just the 8 feelings. Duke has this listed 2 or 3 Psalms for each. That will hit your inbox at 11 o'clock. I hope I scheduled it to hit there on a document for you. So this is a super great thing to help them walk through as part of that meditation. You'll want to concentrate on the fear piece there and the shame piece. So just that's kind of a tool for you to use that you'll have in front of you. And I really encourage you also go on Eden Project and grab that resource. Duke did a great job on that thing. It's really great little piece, meditation piece. But little tools like this can help give you information or resource you to help people do in real time what you're asking them to do. Remember, depression, they're probably not going to do homework. So these interventions are designed to be experiential homework in the session. So this is an example of a resource you can use with them to walk through with them. Okay. Let's talk about something that's kind of blatantly scriptural around all of this. So I created this little phrase called Elijah Protocol. Elijah's story, of course, is in 1 Kings, but there's this poignant chapter, 1 Kings 19, where Elijah falls into a depression. Now, to me, continues to be amazing about Scripture. Elijah showed up on the Mount of Transfiguration with Jesus, Matthew 17. Elijah didn't die. The dude went to heaven in a chariot on fire, on a fire road. And yet, look what James writes about him in 5:17. He was a man with a nature like ours. I'm so comforted by that this great man who is listed with Abraham as being on the Mount of Transfiguration with Jesus as he was transfigured in front of their eyes, Peter, James, and John. James says, yes, he was Elijah. He is the prototypical. He is the one that stands out in Scripture as all of the prophets. And he was a man with a nature like ours. I'm really encouraged by that. So you know the story, 1 Kings 18, he defeats the prophets of Baal and Asherah. And, God consumes his offering on the altar. He doesn't consume the offering of the prophets of Baal and Asherah. So we're just going to walk through this scripture. Just notice some things about this narrative with Elijah. So notice, I'll just read it, starting in verse 1. Ahab told Jezebel all that Elijah had done, had killed all the prophets with a sword. Then Jezebel sent a messenger to Elijah, saying, "May the gods do to me and more also if I do not make your life as one of them by this time tomorrow." Look at verse 3. Then he was afraid, and he arose and ran for his life. This is the great Elijah. This is the man who didn't physically die. This is the man on the Mount of Transfiguration with Abraham, Jesus, Peter, James, and John. And he ran for his life. Amygdala activation. That's a thing we call flight, right? So look at verse 4. He himself went a day's journey into the wilderness and came and sat down under a broom tree. And he asked that he might die, saying, "It is enough now, Lord. Now, O Lord, it is enough." Basically, like, hey, God, I've had it. Take away my life. I'm no better than my fathers. Notice what he did. He went off by himself into the wilderness. Isolation. Look at his toxic shame. I'm no better. I'm no good. I'm just like the ones before me. There's nothing special about me. Listen to what's happening to this great man, the prophet of all prophets, in the hierarchy above above Isaiah. Like, this is the guy. He gets afraid and he's tired. He's fatigued. We'll look at that in just a minute. He's fatigued. And what does he do? Fight, flight, freeze. He flies. His amygdala is red hot. He's looking at the world through a depressive screen. Notice the interaction again. He gets afraid. He goes into anxiety, and look at his depression setting in on him. Isolation, toxic shame. So there's the three, just in 2 verses. There's the interplay between anxiety, toxic shame, and depression. Look at verses 9 and 10. Therefore he came to a cave and lodged in it. And behold, the word of the Lord came to him, and he said to him, "What are you doing here, Elijah?" He said, "I've been very jealous for the Lord, the God of hosts. The people of Israel have forsaken your covenant, thrown down your altars, etc." And he said, and left, and they seek my life to take it away. Listen to his sadness. Listen to what he's processing with God. God asked him a question. "Elijah, what are you doing here?" And he gives an answer. Look at 13 and 14. God, the fire, the sound of a low whisper, which is a fascinating term. It means a thin silence. So God came to him in a thin silence. Remember that when we're intervening on someone who's depressed or anxious, we can use the thin silence. It's the long game. We're going to look at that in just a minute as a kind of a talking point. It's the long game. And so God came to him in the thin silence. And notice he asked him the question. He's got sadness there. And notice in verses 13 and 14, when he heard, he wrapped his face in the cloak. God asked him the question. Look at verse 14. He says exactly the same answer. He's ruminating. Look at how rumination's coming in. And so God comes to him in a thin silence, in a whisper, ask him the same question twice. Elijah's answer is exactly the same. And so notice what he's doing as sadness and rumination come into this. So Elijah's providing a great template for us that even the great ones, literal spiritual giants, when they get caught in this thing, their nature is just like ours. So Elijah got afraid, and his amygdala got red hot, and he flew. He went into isolation, into toxic shame. He started looking through a filter of depression. He started ruminating. He couldn't get untracked from that message that they're out to get me too. I've done all this, and I alone am left. So notice how he has some of his data is accurate. Like when he talks about what happened, the people had forsaken God's covenant. He had thrown down their altars. They had killed prophets with a sword, and he was left. And so he's using partial data that becomes fuel for his rumination to cover the whole story with depression. Don't miss that in this. Often people will take data from their lives, and because they're looking at it through their filter, they'll take data that's partially true And they'll make that the entire narrative. And we won't go further into the narrative. God shows him, tells him, when he connects him with Elisha, commissions him to go back to work, feeds him. He got 2 naps, like he dealt with his body. Then God says to him, hey, I got a whole lot of people. It's called a remnant. I'm always going to have that. You're not alone. So, be the last thing we do in detail. Notice what God does when we're coaching our Elijahs. Expand your application of rest. Here's what I mean by that. We can tell them, hey, get sleep, use good sleep hygiene, but also understand that part of their rest can be resting with you in the session. It's like, you're under no pressure here. Let's take our time. Let's breathe some. Let's pay attention to your body, do some of this relaxation. Let's talk about some of the things you're meandering around on, what you're ruminating on. So when I say expand the application, I mean, as a coach, rest is not just what they do after the session or before. They can rest during the session. I would tell them that, like, hey, when God came to Elijah, he allowed Elijah to rest with the angels. And so to be able to say, hey, these sessions can be restful for you. We just process this a little bit at a time. Here's something that sounds a little bit crazy, but if they are not eating, tell them, hey, when we come to session next time, I want you to bring a healthy snack with you. And we're going to enjoy a snack together, more of the experiential piece. If they're overeating, process the overeating. It's okay to talk about symptoms and what they're doing in their symptoms to compensate for their depression. You see the verse reference here, 5b to a. They can do a 40-mile run if they want to, like Elijah. I don't suggest it for clients. It's a long ways. Continue using lots of plural pronouns and make sure they continue to recognize you're in this with them. Notice Elijah's isolation going off by, he left his servants there and he went off by himself. Lots of plural pronouns when you're working with someone depressed. Consistent, calm encouragement. Notice God's thin silence. It's okay to provide encouragement. I've had, I don't know how many guys say to me through the years, hey, Phil, it bounced off of me like a little pebble off of a tank when you told me it was going to be okay, but I didn't forget that. And so remember this aspect of, you've heard Todd say it, I said it in treatment probably every day. Hey, I'm going to throw a bunch of stuff on you, and as time goes on, it'll sink into you. So don't hesitate to encourage them to say, hey, you're going to be okay. I don't know what the circumstances are going to be. You're going to be okay. I'm going to be with you in this. Like, sometimes we forget the basics of good old-fashioned human encouragement. And I've had guys come to me and big eyes to go, Phil, is it going to be okay? And they would come back, like I said, sometimes years later and say, man, we had that conversation that I've long forgotten it. We had that conversation in the hall and I asked you if it was going to be okay. And you put your hand on my shoulder and said, you bet it is. Or you just came to me and said, hey, man, you're going to be okay. You're going to be okay. That's very powerful. And then commission them through homework. Give them tiny little assignments. One quick thing to do. Spend 1 minute this next week thinking about meditating on something and tap your legs. 1 minute. Make sure you start the next session picking up with that assignment. I put down here, reinforces movement, accountability, attentiveness, belonging, mattering, and disrupts isolation, creates movement, even if they don't complete it. What I mean by that is you give them the assignment, they have the assignment looming with them, and even if they don't do it, you coming back to it will be movement. You've at least moved with them in the assignment. So remember, those are just 5 little bullet points, just kind of coaching tips as you're working with those. Next to last slide, the backdrop. It's a neuronal network. It's going to have anxiety, toxic shame, and impaired anger. All 3 of those are going to be on board working together as a network. So 4 quick things. Braid those 4 factors above. We don't have to do feelings and story every single session. You're still doing super great work if you're doing work on the mind and the thoughts and the rumination that people are having. Lean on screen sharing for these resources, toxic shame cycle, etc. You're not treating a condition, you're treating a person with a nature like yours, as James said about Elijah. And just remember the long game. This is a long game when you're with depressed people. Last thing, this is from a general theory of love. Again, you'll refer to this later. Jordan will make the slides available to you. One mind revises another, one heart changes its partner. This astounding legacy of our combined status as mammals and neural beings is limbic revision. That's what we're doing in coaching. The power to remodel the parts of the people we love as our attractors activate certain limbic pathways in the brain's inexorable memory mechanism reinforces them. You're creating memories with your clients. And last is this one. Who we are, who we become depends in part on whom we love. We love our clients love us through attachment, and who they are and who they become will have a whole lot to do with how you love them through the process of dealing with their depression.